Hi, Lars. Folks, as you join, if you are willing, please go ahead and share video. Let's make this as much of a meeting around the table as we can make it.
See, so it's like Meet Echo, but like Zoom.
Yeah.
Or I guess that's the other way. I should say it the other way. Like Zoom, but with Meet Echo. So I guess I'll put in a feature request. I want like virtual backgrounds and things now.
Uh-huh.
And I want like emojis animating. Are you listening, Jay? Like you're getting this? Like, yeah, exactly.
Just check I've got that right. Animated backgrounds, and you want something about flying emojis, yeah?
Yeah, all of that. Absolutely.
Okay, sure.
Right away.
Maybe being the IETF, we should just look for animated foreground.
Give it just a minute more. People are still joining. No, the joining is slowing down, so I think we'll go ahead and start. Everybody's had a chance to see the agenda for a couple of days. I'll ask for agenda bashes, but remind people that it would be nice to have the agenda bashes in the notes before we start. Does anybody have anything that they want to add here? Not hearing anything, we'll jump in. Alice notes that we don't have anything blocking from RFC production. We do have some gearing that is in the works for an XML to RFC release today that the RBC is waiting on for releasing on RFC that has an author that has non-Latin script characters in their name. So that is underway. We are getting very close to finishing the transition from tools.ietf.org to the other services that we've set up to replace it. I'm expecting this week to build the final set of redirects for Glenn, and sometime next week or the week after next, we'll put those into place. We've got our own instance of BibXML, the BibXML service running. I sent a note to the IETF list, the chairs, the IRSG, tools discuss, reminding people that this transition is going to happen very soon. We got a suggestion from Mark Nottingham that I wanted to bounce off the folks on this call, that we should consider decoupling the name of the service from the particular format that the service happens to be kicking out now. We're targeting it being named bibxml.ietf.org. he asks that we name it bibliography.ietf.org or bib.ietf.org if the bibliography is too long. Does that resonate with anybody? Do they care? Should we stay the course and just call it bibxml because it's kind of what people are used to looking for? Any feedback? Yeah, Jay, just go ahead. Anybody?
Yeah, sorry, Rob, I just...
Yeah.
So do we think that the same service might provide the bibliography in any format other than bibxml?
It currently also serves things in Ribos's
Relaton format.
Relaton format.
Well, then I think Mark's right. I think we should call it bibliography or something, bib, whatever. That then provides us future proofing as we provide it in other formats. Because I think in the way that we provide these shouldn't just be thinking about IETF authors writing IDs. We should also consider external authors writing in different formats that are possibly going to use a more standard bibliography format than bibxml.
Right now, the data tracker serves BibTeX, so this thing might serve BibTeX in the future. So, Kusara, let's consider, and in fact, let's just go ahead and execute on running the service as bib.ietf.org, and we can CNAME bibxml.ietf.org to it for a little while. We can get Maddie to give us the domain name since Glenn's out for another day. So I'm targeting, as I mentioned in the notes, doing the basically dedelegation of tools.ietf.org, serving that domain name from the IETF infrastructure the week of May 23rd. I did find this morning a spot in Ribos's code where they had, they were scraping the legacy service, and I'm coordinating with them to make sure that that scrape stops so that we don't get into a loop when the legacy service was replaced with our own service. And depending on when they execute on that, it may nudge us out of that May 23rd week, but it won't be a big nudge. Anybody have any questions or other thoughts about what's left with the move away from tools.ietf.org? All right. We had a small group meet, including Medico. We were talking about our plans for 114. During that meeting, we decided that we would set all of the rest of the working groups up with the Zulip channels needed for Medico to use Zulip as the chat backend for IETF 114. We're expecting, and this depends a little bit on Glenn when he gets back, but to have those channels all set up by the end of May. During 114, we'll still have all those channels bridged to Jabber. Whoa, Cindy put in some stuff here I hadn't seen. So it's just getting the Jabber bridges in. All of the Zulip streams have already been created. Thanks, Cindy. We need to decide, this is probably a conversation that should be taken to the ISG so that they're not surprised, whether or not we continue to keep the Jabber bridge up and offer any Jabber services at all post 114, assuming that the Zulip stuff works. So This is a thought that may not have been on people's radar. We need to start socializing it. Any thoughts or questions?
Yeah, hi. Isn't I would think one of the main blocking factors for the full cutover is need echo integration.
Yeah, so they've prototyped this and are not expecting to encounter any impedance. They think they're going to have the integration in place but well before we get to 114, and we're planning to use a tools interim to test it before we get into the meeting.
Great.
One of the things that we discovered on the call, this is going to open up, and it's part of the experience that we need to consider for people at 114 is with Zulip as the back end and Medico's expectation that they're just going to be using a very, very thin delegation model into what Zulip provides. People are going to be able to use rich text in the chat and include images and emojis and stuff. And these are not going to translate to Jabber. So. All right. So as people know, we successfully made the transition onto an upgraded version of IETF-A. This went much smoother than I expected it to. I'm happy with how few issues we had. There were a handful of issues. The largest I report in the notes was a issue with Microsoft 365 and all the corporations using Microsoft 365 being affected by our new IP address not being on their list of addresses to accept high volume mail from. So it took a bit of a scramble, took 3 or 4 days to resolve, to find the right people inside Microsoft to get that access list updated. So we've made a note, should we ever do a similar migration in the future, to reach out to the people that we identified this time around, send a bigger signal to the community about other places that might need to be touched, and to investigate having a different approach to the mail infrastructure that would allow us to use both the new and the old mail server addresses at the same time to help condition the new address for everyone as we move into a transition. Any questions about this? Oh, I mentioned in the notes. You can do comparisons against now versus a month ago on Scout APM. You can see that the data tracker is running about 3 times as fast on the new infrastructure. It's a combination of the new infrastructure underneath us and running on a slightly more recent version of MariaDB. All right, nobody's jumping in with questions about the server migration.
Just a thank you and congratulations.
Yes. And thanks for everybody that helped us during the testing period. Helped make that go much more smoothly. There's a conversation in the ISG right now noting that there are some groups, some of which have been around for quite some time, that don't have the global whitelist configured in their accept list for that particular group. We're talking about whether or not we program automatically just going in and shoving that into the configuration for every list, like every day. whether to do this now or after we make the Mailman 3 transition, and whether or not there's any, what lists it wouldn't make sense to have this global allow list configured for. And I just wanted to note it here. I don't know unless somebody has this sparks an idea for somebody. I just wanted to bring it up to share awareness that this was an issue. One thing in the conversation that I just pointed out to the ISG, our allow list has many addresses in it at this point that I think we should purge. Side effect of adding any successfully created data tracker account to the allow list, and our super low barrier of entry for creating data tracker accounts. We've had conversations among this group in the past about tiers of reputation, I guess, for data tracker accounts, where you would have to have done something a little bit more than having created a data tracker account before it would cause that thing to land in the global allow list or not. These are questions and conversations that are going to come to the surface again over the next few weeks. So I wanted to plant the seed so people could be thinking about it.
But for sure, there are some mailing lists that should not be accepted with whitelist, right? So for instance, IoT Directorate is mostly only the member can send to the list, but everyone can see it. And the same thing for the OSCAP 48, right?
Mm-hmm. So we'll have to have some way to know which ones we should go and flick this on, should we decide that this is will inflict. And it could be a matter of just active working groups and research groups and programs, right? We limit it to that. And
the other thing,
anything,
Robert,
yeah.
If we're adding people that have a data tracker account, do we add all the emails that they have in the data tracker account, or just the main one?
I believe we add all active ones, but remember that the whitelist is also a monotonically increasing thing. At the moment, nothing comes out unless we explicitly take it out. So if it was ever active, even after it's been marked inactive, it doesn't get removed from the list as it currently exists. Yeah, the all addresses thing is coming up in lots of contexts right now. There's a bug on the data tracker for the API submission interface where the user presents themselves as an identity that's not their, it's not the same as the identity that they present in the draft. It does the wrong thing, and we just need to change that one to accept, to realize that any address known to the data tracker for that user should match the address that's presented inside the draft. So, Jay just added a note to the tools workshops that we're going to have a survey out soon and take the results of that survey to prioritize when we have which workshop, and then we'll start working on scheduling them. We've made, Nick in particular has made significant progress on the integration of Wiki.js and the data tracker. We believe that this is now finished and we're ready to start the effort of moving the working groups that still have track wikis into Wiki.js instead of track. So I've got a question in the list, and I've received a couple of emails suggesting some points. So I'll ask in a moment for people that sent me these emails to go ahead and bring those points up. My first question is to the group, but mainly to Jay. At one point, we were expecting, okay, so the edit here is that we were just going to have one big wiki, the wiki.ietf.org, and that's still what we're planning to use for these groups to migrate their things to. Does that exist yet? Is it, or is it an older instance? Do we need to
No,
flush and
it
reset?
exists. It exists. We were just going to wait till we were ready to properly turn on the integration of Wiki.js and Data Tracker. And when that's done, then we can start port content across. Well, Greg and I need to talk about a plan for it. It's going to be a mix of staff and secretariat doing it and working groups doing it. So we just need to sit down and look at it to plan that. We're going to do that now, I think, now that the Data Tracker integration is ready for us to go.
Nick, do you want
And by the
to
way,
go ahead, Eric?
so if there is a wiki part of it for a working group, what's the situation when the working group is closed? I guess the document do not disappear, right? But how can we can keep the access running? The point is basically next week at the retreat, we talk about living documents like implementation status or deployment status that needs to be updated even after the working group is closed.
Yeah, sure. So the permissions model that we are building into Wiki.js uses data tracker roles. So the access for a group's pages could be limited to the chairs of the groups or the ADs, right? The group gets closed. We could have the past chairs continue to have access if we want to. This is something that we could set up. The ADs would always have access. The secretariat would always have access. And any editors, specific editors that we designate at any given point in time, you know, we can, the group that Jay just mentioned, where there's, you know, a core team that is knowledgeable about Wiki.js and is moving these things back and forth and moving out of, we may create a group for these people and give them roles inside this group. So,
Can I just add a couple of things? I think we should treat this as an ordinary wiki, which means that we don't use those restricted permissions unless we have to. We leave the whole thing open, anybody can edit, and it is self-policed. So that, you know, if you notice something that looks like it's bad, then you revert back a previous revision and discuss it with the person. In the same way that we do on Wikipedia, if somebody put something, you know, strange about the building, famous building down the road, then I revert it and discuss it with them. So that, I think, is probably the best way to start. And if that fails, then I think we implement the permissions mechanism. But I have a great deal of faith that actually the ordinary mechanism will work to start off with. I can see from your face you don't.
You know, you are trusting the mankind, and I don't, but it's okay, right? Let's be positive. We can try it. I mean, as you said, right, you can revert.
Yes.
yeah, I think has a data tracker account might be an appropriate, at least a minimal barrier to entry, as opposed to just anybody anonymous editing, because we're,
Yes.
you know.
No, that's taken for granted. There has to be a net data tracker account. You can't edit otherwise. Yes.
Yeah, and to be clear, that's the equivalent security model we have now for Track.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, Nick, could you look at that particular instance, the wiki.ietf.org instance, and make sure its configuration can support what we just discussed? All right. So I've got a few things to note about the data tracker. It's only been a month since we've talked, but we've crammed 4 or 5 months of progress on the data tracker since then. We had the deployment of version 8. It's our first deployment from GitHub. Had several deployments since then. We're starting to work on some pretty major infrastructure changes. The velocity that we had hoped we would start to experience making the change into GitHub is appearing. So the changes to the data tracker, I think, are going to continue to be fast and furious. So, for example, the release that I'm working on building and testing today, and I hope to have deployed sometime tomorrow, moves the data tracker to Python 3.9. It's only 3.9 and not a more recent version of Python than that, because 3.9 is what we can get on the Bear OS at the moment. But we're making steps eventually towards having that part of the data tracker ultimately in a container. So what the Bear OS provides will no longer matter. We have a good proof of concept already for making things like document submission asynchronous, so that we don't have the long blocking HTTP transactions. We'll be testing that during the week. This week, it won't be part of this week's release, but I'm expecting that it will be something that's in production before we get to our next tools call. So this brings us in our production environment to where we're going to have the data tracker talking to some parts of its functionality running inside a container. Notably, there'll be a Celery instance in a container running that the data tracker uses for these asynchronous bits. Our near-term focus has several large items in it. I've listed them here. This is where we're prioritizing our focus. There's one bullet that I need to add to that from something that we discovered this morning. So again, focusing on enabling the asynchronous interactions. We need to finish the work to correct the nom-com eligibility issues that we've noted. We need to add support for the new RFC editor model. That's on my plate. I expect to have that not as part of this release tomorrow, but hopefully by release. I'd like to say towards the end of the week, but more likely into the beginning of next week. And then we need to start the work on the time zone aware timestamp transitions again. And that's a really, really big piece of work. It's been holding for the server transition and the move to GitHub. And it's time for us to go ahead and bite that off and do it. That's going to have several of us distracted for quite some time. I think from a programming perspective, this thing is going to take us, it's a big bite, two or 3 weeks of pretty hard work. And we're hoping that we can re-architect the way that that it's being approached from what we had planned the last run we made at this, so that we can avoid the 4-hour outage that the last planned attempt at this entailed. We're trying to see if we can find a way that we can actually make the transition a little bit more incremental, so that the the final necessary downtime is much shorter. Now, the bullet that I need to add to this that is missing is we, as a bit of a priority action, discovered a problem with the Xml Rfc library implementation this morning. It's one of these things where no good deed goes unpunished. As we have made the data tracker run more efficiently, we have relaxed some constraints on the way we are operating it as a web service. We are allowing our workers to run for a much longer period of time before killing them. The number of requests that they can run before we tell them that they must restart. Because restart is expensive. People have noticed when we restart the data tracker, it is slow on that very first request that hits any given worker as Python brings everything into memory, right? So we've moved things to where we have on any given thread, these restarts are now days apart instead of hours apart. And we've discovered an issue in the Xml to Rfc library that is an architectural issue. It shows up several places. Jennifer's started digging in deeply to identify these places, and we can start working with it, where it loads in its notion of what today is as it's loading, and just writes it down hard. So now that we have threads, now we can have workers that run for days, we're having things like people submitting a draft today in XML that doesn't have an explicit date inside of it, so it creates the text version with the date that it woke up as, which was 2 days ago. Yeah. We have another draft that is somebody's having trouble with, that the data tracker is complaining that the date's not okay because it appears to be in the future and it's not. So and this is actually an architectural issue. We may work around it in the short term by doing a daily restart of the data tracker and crying because we're having to do so. But we're going to prioritize this fix over many of the other things that we're working on. Soon after we get through the time zone aware timestamps, I just want to bring these up to people because, again, I think we've got the ISG to have agreed to this already, but we may want to send a note to the community, and I don't think that we've done so. Because I think we need to do just a little more work to be sure that what we're going to ask the community to do doesn't become a burden, is to require draft submissions to have all the references fully expanded, or any other includes of diagrams or whatever, fully expanded, so that the thing that is in the repository doesn't rely on something that externally that could change after the submission for your note well reasons, if nothing else. And there's a whole lot of else's besides the nothing else. So we've had this conversation before. We know we're going down this path, but it's time, I think, to go ahead and implement it. One of the things that we need to do is to make sure that there are that there's supported author tools for an author to get their hands on a fully expanded draft easily, and for a way to be able to interact with the data tracker when somebody walks up to the data tracker not knowing about this requirement, for them to quickly get the fully expanded thing and review it and submit it. We also have discovered a bug, self-inflicted. When we started parsing XML instead of text, when somebody submitted XML for things like references, the code that's doing this parsing didn't expand includes. So the code that determined references between documents started just not working. Complaining with warnings into logs that nobody reads. Different issue that we need to address. But there are a lot of drafts out there right now where the referenced and referenced by graphs are absolutely incorrect. We need to fix the code and rerun all of the just rebuild the reference relationships for the drafts, since we started parsing the XML for building these graphs. It's not going to be hard. It's not going to be a big deal, but we've got to go do it. Okay, anybody think that there are any things that are a higher priority to focus on with the data tracker than what I've listed here? Anybody that thinks that we're focusing on something that we shouldn't be focusing on? That'd be a good time to bring it up.
Robert, can I go back to the fully expanded IDs? Where the X includes point to our own Viv XML citations, don't we have sufficient certainty that those will not change, that we can leave those unexpanded? What I'm just thinking about is that when this goes to the Auth48 process, if they're fully expanded, then that significantly increases the work of the RPC because they need to check.
Yeah, the conversation that we had with this in the past, we would have something similar to unprep.
Right. Okay.
That would you know, programmatically turn those into something that could they could work with that would get current versions.
So okay, but if somebody has put in a fully expanded RFC reference and then edited it because they didn't like it, then the unprep tool would detect that and not unprep it.
Yeah, it's not a requirement that we've discussed.
Right. Okay. All right then. Okay. Right. Thank you.
But yeah, the downside of leaving the things unexpanded again gets into the just ultimately decoupling these services. If somebody wants to actually use one of these things, especially if they want to use it offline, then they can't, right? The service has to be live in order for them to be able to actually get the content that was needed. So the path that, and it's going to take work, but the path that we're going down, if something started off with an X include in V3, that we would leave some tracks to what that X include was, like in a comment or whatever, so that reversion to that X include would be fairly straightforward. So, all right, yeah, if anybody has any thoughts around this after they've had a chance to go think about it again, it is a fairly big thing. It's likely to have very subtle unintended the opportunity for unintended consequences is high. So do spend time thinking about it and bring stuff to the list if you have even vague feelings of concern about where we're going. Kasara, you've got a stretch of things here. I'll let you take the floor. Can't hear you. There are two places that you might be muted. There is the mute button in the left-hand bar, and then there's the mute button in the very bottom right corner.
With any local mute, of course.
Yeah, it looks like he's going to bounce and try again. We'll skip ahead, and when he gets back, we'll come back to his sections. On the common bootstrap thing, no changes since the last meeting. There's been some discussion of the new data tracker coloration. Mark Nottingham opened an issue that was titled "It's So Blue." But he had in the thread some legitimate complaints about contrast and accessibility that we might want to take a look at. We have not deployed the common bootstrap theme that Springload built for us with the data tracker yet. Still expecting to have that in an upcoming release. But that set of changes is not going to address several of the comments that Mark made in the ticket that we've linked to here. I had him agree that we would close that ticket and just take it as input into a bigger conversation, ongoing conversation about what the styling for the data tracker should be. We can, and we'll just continue to have that conversation as we go forward. Jay, we may want to have Springload take to run the data tracker as it currently exists, or after we apply the common bootstrap theme to it through the test tools that they have for accessibility, and just give us a report on the findings that it produces.
Good idea. Yeah.
All right. While we're waiting for Kasara to return, I'll go ahead and skip over XML Rfc. Ryan, I believe, yeah, you're here. Do you want to briefly talk through the points that you've added?
Yeah, just a couple little changes I noted in here. One, we add support for VAT receipts, so those should be going out in the next day or so. We're just kind of validating the format of them. Also, people that have registered for 114 may notice that there are some changes to the gender options. There's the latest nomenclature there. That's mostly it for me.
So Greg and I have been having a conversation about the efficacy of analytics.ietf.org among what it's telling us about what at least the IETF community members are how they're interacting, and the registration system, I think, is going to give us a way to see the gap for how many participants are actually interacting with the registration system versus how many of them are letting the analytics tool gather anything, whether through their own choice or because of browser configuration. Like if they've got something like Ghostery, because Ghostery does block analytics. I noted this when I registered that my browser configuration caused the Matomo JavaScript to not load. We also deployed analytics. I'm really skipping ahead to the web analytics section of this thing. We deployed this with the data tracker as well, and it ran for a while before I noticed that the configuration at the data tracker would cause every major modern browser to not load the Matomo JavaScript because I did not include analytics.ietf.org in the data tracker's configuration for the content security policies. The next release will include that, and we'll start to see a change in what the analytics are gathering. I guess, Greg, do you want to throw in anything else on the web analytics thing as I'm skipping around the agenda here?
Just that I think that we expected there was going to be fine tuning, and I noted that Eric, there's also fine tuning for the Yang catalog where analytics is also deployed, and understanding what it's actually telling us is something we'll keep working at. Yeah.
So let's go ahead and, Kasara, can you try talking, see if we can hear you now?
Can you hear me now?
Yep. All
Okay,
good.
changing interfaces. But
Sorry about that.
so on Auth Tools, the major update was to remove the requirement for data tracker API key, and I'm planning to release another version today to support WDIF on our ID comparisons. Are there any questions about Auth Tools?
Anybody on the call not gone and tried to do things with other tools yet? I mean, if you've not touched it, and if you've not really tried to make it do something useful, please do so, in the next week. Because we are going to start redirecting the XML to RFC, tools.ietf.org, and, the slash page and the slash experimental page towards it, very soon.
So moving to XML to RFC, there were a couple of releases since the last call. Now authors can put now XML to RFC renders non-Latin characters properly on the RFC front, and there's another fix coming on to fix a defect on the text format for references with non-Latin characters. I have added a notes page about what what XML to RFC thinks a non-Latin Latin character means. So there's a bunch of Unicode code points there on the link. If you go to that link, you can have a look at there. And we might have to come back to that in the future, sometime in the future, to update that list or make it a better of representing what Latin characters are. On upcoming work for XML to RFC, I'm planning to go through the current issues. There are more than 100 open on GitHub, and close any V2 only issues that only happens on V2 formats. And on the track instant, XML to RFC was used to capture issues for other tools, so I will be moving around those tickets to the correct repositories, hopefully cut down some of the open tickets on XML to RFC. And that's it from me.
There was a section on the website we can take as read, but if anybody has any comments about the website as well.
If I may, I'm just slightly puzzled by seeing the Wagtail moving to Python 3.10, while Data Tracker is just moving to 3.9. I mean, those things are unrelated, but it's kind of strange to run to Python version.
Wagtail is already in Docker. The main website, the Wagtail portion of the website's already running as a Docker image. The data tracker is running bare on the OS.
Sure, but I mean, it's more about for the developers, right? Having two slightly different versions, but that's all.
Yeah.
Nothing dramatic.
We're hoping to get to a world soon where things are all tracking a reasonable version of the most recent Python, right? So, yeah, we really need to get off 3.6 because 3.6 support for 3.6 ended May 1st.
Yeah.
Okay, Eric, you have an item here on Yang catalog where you mentioned nothing specific, that you're optimizing the Matomo analytics. If you could, and I know I'm probably catching you cold, this is a flat-footed question, I apologize. But could we start here on this call to get a little bit more insight into the roadmap and any new features that, any
Okay.
milestones in the roadmap that we've achieved. Since we have given
Pantheon.
Pantheon a little bit more lead on this, it would be nice to see what we're, for everybody to see what we're doing with it.
Okay. The next big step is basically to incorporate the SID, not the SRv6 SID, but more the Karsten SID, as well in the Yang catalog. And we got already a couple of calls on this with Karsten and the other people in Yang catalog. But next time I will prepare more thing on this. Stuff
Cool.
done and stuff to be done.
I believe that the rest of what we've got here, we could reasonably take as read unless people have questions about it. The ongoing care and feeding of our databases, the upcoming security review for the things running on IETF-A. We've got about 10 minutes left. Anybody have any other business that they'd like to discuss? Backing out.
Yeah, so one thing, look, I'm obviously highly biased here, but would just like to say how impressed I am by the level of progress that is being made on some of our core tools at the moment. The work that I'm now, is very transparent through GitHub, just shows a remarkable rate of progress, and it's very, very good to see. It's good to see the many people in the community contributing to all of the GitHub issues. It's good to see things being done quickly. It really feels like everything's coming together, and I'm just very impressed, and I want to say thank you to everybody for that.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you. And yes, it feels good. So. Since we've got a few extra minutes, I ask everybody to, try to think out of our normal pattern of conversation here. What do you think we should be talking about next year? Right? If things were going to go optimally for over the next year for knocking off the small things and even the big things that are in the way right now, what's the big thing that's after that?
Mailman 3 is something we probably want to see sooner rather than later.
You
Mailman.
got, okay, Mailman 3. Yep.
RFC editor tooling and website. I'm not sure if this is us or if it's contractors or if they're doing it, but some of us will need to be involved there.
We probably want to have that that effort at least touch base with this team if the team isn't actually actively involved in some of it. I agree.
Yeah, and personally, I think the data tracker will need more work. I like what Nicholas has been doing in terms of the UI revamp for the agenda page. I think we have a few more dialogues, like milestone editing and others that would certainly like a redesign. So that I think is going to keep going.
definitely. So do we think that, let me throw a thing out there and see how you and Eric at least react. We got a lot of tension right now around Markdown not being the same in many platforms, right? Is the IETF a venue perhaps that we try to bring all of these champions of different flavors of Markdown together and make a superset or something, so that there's a chance of resolving this issue for everybody and not just us? Or is this somebody else's problem?
I'd like to, if we can get the people who are driving these various flavors in the room, right? Otherwise, we're setting ourselves up for another Markdown variant.
Yeah.
A common one. But I mean, we did talk on the ISG about whether we want to define our own flavor, because we have authors that are using Markdown at the moment. They're using 2 different flavors, and we're also using Markdown for the wiki, and we're using Markdown. We want to use more Markdown in the data tracker. So I like the idea of trying to make that a broader effort and basically define. Can't call it common mark. We can call it like standard mark or something, rather than just doing one for us. But it requires us to figure out if we actually know these people and we can approach them and we can get them interested.
Yep. Find them, engage them. Yeah, it's one that I would like to see. And then, I have I brought up on the calls with the change management team for the RFC vocabulary a few times. I think that it's not an improbable future that we might want to move our authoring format, since we have so many authors working in Markdown, to where we actually move to a model where the where we're at least accept getting into the through the IETF review stage, where the lingua franca is Markdown and not XML. So
I would even go further in the sense that, I mean, when we did the XML to RFC stuff, when we started, right, XML was the modern thing, and so obviously we're going to use it as an authoring language and also a publication language, right? But now it's like, I don't know, almost 20 years later, and we're finding ourselves in a world where quickly Markdown is the authoring format, and XML is only the archival/publication format. And so these 2 worlds are colliding pretty hard in the IETF right now, where a significant fraction of authors are basically living in the Markdown authoring land and have no interest in ever editing in XML again, right? And we still have a lot that are doing XML directly. And then we also still ones that never did XML and are still submitting text, right? But I think especially sort of the younger generation of participants, I think they're very much Markdown based.
Yeah, I think it's important to notice that the only real discontinuity we still have is the auth48 process. And you saw me saying auth48 4 minutes ago. I think we really need to understand how to make the auth48 process working better, and doing the right amount of GitHub and whatever is one part of it, but also making it easier for people who author in Markdown would be another part. And Alex here is probably right that the RSWG will be part of this, but I think we need to understand that this is something that needs to be done at some point.
If I just add a couple of things, I think firstly, I think it's probably time for us to get some more data. We did an author survey a couple of years ago and they gave us some data, but things have changed. And some point in the next few months, I think it might be worthwhile us considering redoing that to get more data about how people do things. We also have the monthly surveys that John Levine does as the temporary RFC series project manager of authors. And perhaps we can get that data better shared for people to see whether we have a change in the number of people using XML or Markdown or other things. And secondly, I'm not sure it actually matters to us to get various Markdown implementers into the room. All that matters to us is that we have a Markdown that is sufficient to cover all aspects of the authoring process. We have Carsten, I think, is close there in Cramdown RFC. I think MMark is close to that. I think, though, of course, we have they're two separate ones. If we have a single Markdown that covers all of our use cases, then that's sufficient for us to take that forward for internal tooling. Trying to solve the larger problem of standardizing Markdown across all different sites, I think, is perhaps too difficult to try to tackle.
Yeah,
Strongly
the only
agree with you.
pushback. Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, Karsten, I think, published the XKCD thing about the standards. Yeah, just pick the one that's closest to us that does what we need. It'd be great if we could unify the two that we've got. It might be a few years out, but certainly getting unified all the Markdown people, step 2 will be then they have to convert all their existing database content, and that's not going to ever happen.
So there's a trap. People are thinking about just draft authoring. And when we're talking about Markdown, we need to remember that we've got far more going on in Markdown in the community now than just draft authoring. So the notes that are being taken on notes.ietf.org are being heavily used for what end up becoming minutes. And the tension between the markdowns that the data tracker uses using the Markdown library and what the what notes support is causing people grief. We're going to have Markdown support for BOF requests. We're ultimately going to have these things for charters. We're going to be moving into places where we're going to be taking advantage of things that, Markdown extensions even, that haven't been available when we just had plain text objects, that are going to need to be portable across services. So I think it is a far bigger problem that we need to address than just, reconciling Cramdown and MMark. And if there's a dividing line that's between that and solving this problem for the entire world, maybe we should look for that.
Yes, I agree, Robert. I think that we ought to be looking at our use cases and solving for our use cases. And you've just identified some more. So, we need to make sure we have that list properly documented and understood. But I don't think we should attempt to solve beyond that initially. That's sufficient for us. That's going to be hard enough as it is.
All right. We've gone over a little bit. Thanks everybody for staying on. I appreciate the time that everybody puts in to helping make sure that we're going the right direction. And now we'll see everyone online as we are moving towards our next meeting, and I really hope to see everybody in person at the next IETF. We'll talk with you soon.